Beneath the crushing difficulty of Zelda II, The Adventure of Link, lies a secret that Nintendo never explicitly told players, a dark, fragmented history written in dungeon architecture, enemy placement, and the very structure of Hyrule itself. While millions struggled against Iron Knuckles and fell into Death Mountain's lava pits, they missed the hidden story playing out around them. The six palaces aren't just brutal gauntlets designed to punish players, they're archaeological evidence of Hyrule's greatest catastrophe, monuments to a kingdom's desperate last stand. And the truth hidden within their crumbling walls? It rewrites everything we thought we knew about the original Legend of Zelda. Most gamers remember Zelda II as that impossibly hard game that broke controllers and friendships, the side-scrolling black sheep of the franchise. The one that ditched the top-down exploration for platforming challenges that felt more like Castlevania than Zelda. But this reputation has overshadowed something far more important. Zelda II tells the darkest, most consequential story in the entire classic Zelda timeline. The game opens with a shocking revelation that fans often overlook in their rush to complain about difficulty. Link discovers a sleeping Princess Zelda hidden in the North Castle, but she's not the Zelda from the first game. This is an ancient princess from Hyrule's distant past, cursed into eternal slumber by a wizard spell after refusing to reveal the location of the triforce. Already, the narrative is screaming at players that something terrible happened in Hyrule's history, something so catastrophic that it was deliberately hidden and forgotten. Link's quest isn't about rescuing this sleeping beauty, it's about obtaining the Triforce of Courage to break her curse. But here's where the story becomes brilliant in its subtlety. To acquire this third piece of the Triforce, Link must venture into 6 ancient palaces scattered across a Hyrule that's radically different from the first game. These palaces aren't new constructions, they're ruins, ancient defensive structures from an era when Hyrule faced extinction. The first palace, situated in the shadow of Death Mountain, immediately establishes the narrative framework that the entire game builds upon. Parapa Palace appears relatively accessible compared to what comes later, but its very existence raises questions. Why would ancient Hylians build a palace in such a dangerous location? Why surround it with enemies and traps? The answer becomes clear when examining the palace's architecture and defenders. Inside Parapa Palace, players encounter Stalfosh Knights, Moblins, and the intimidating Red Iron Knuckle, all arranged in defensive formations. These aren't random enemy placements, they're strategic positions designed to repel invaders. The palace wasn't built as a tomb or treasure vault, it was constructed as a fortress. Ancient Hyrule was under siege, and these palaces served as the kingdom's last line of defense against an overwhelming threat. The candle obtained in Parapa Palace isn't just a gameplay item allowing access to darker areas, it's a symbolic torch passed from the ancient defenders to Link himself. The ability to illuminate darkness represents the very purpose of these palaces, to preserve light and knowledge against the encroaching shadows that threatened to consume Hyrule. Every item Link acquires tells part of this forgotten history. Death Mountain itself becomes a crucial piece of the puzzle when examined closely. In the original Legend of Zelda, Death Mountain is a perilous area, but in Zelda II, it's absolutely infested with enemies. The mountain range dominates the northern region of Hyrule, creating a natural barrier that the ancient kingdom had to fortify. Midoro Palace, hidden within these treacherous peaks, represents the second layer of Hyrule's defensive strategy. Midoro Palace introduces the hammer, and this isn't coincidental. The hammer allows Link to break through barriers and obstacles that previously blocked his path, literally shattering the remnants of ancient fortifications. But notice what the hammer reveals. More palaces, more ruins, more evidence of a civilization that built layer upon layer of defenses. Hyrule wasn't just threatened, it was desperate. The geography itself tells a story that links to the original game in fascinating ways. Between the first Legend of Zelda and Zelda II, Hyrule's landscape has dramatically changed. New towns have appeared: Rauru, Ruto, Saria, Mido, Naburu, Darunia. These aren't random names, they would later become the names of the sages in Ocarina of Time. The towns represent pockets of civilization clinging to survival in a hostile land, each one a beacon of hope in a world still recovering from catastrophe. But the palaces themselves reveal the true scope of what Hyrule survived. As Link ventures to the Island Palace, accessible only by crossing the sea, the narrative implications become staggering. Why would the ancient kingdom hide a palace on a remote island? The answer is chilling. They were running out of safe places to hide the triforce pieces. The threat they faced was so overwhelming that they scattered their most sacred relics to the furthest corners of the known world.
The Island Palace introduces environmental hazards that previous palaces only hinted at. Lava pits, collapsing bridges, enemies that swarm in coordinated attacks. These aren't just difficulty spikes, they're archaeological evidence of how the ancient kingdom fell. The palaces show escalating desperation in their defensive design. The builders knew that earlier defenses had failed, so each subsequent palace incorporated lessons learned from devastating defeats. Maze Island Palace takes this evolution even further. Hidden in a labyrinth so complex that finding it requires the fairy spell to navigate through impossibly narrow passages, this palace represents paranoia and desperation elevated to architectural form. The ancient builders didn't just want to hide the Triforce piece, they wanted to make it impossible to find. They created puzzles within puzzles, traps within traps, knowing that conventional defenses had proven insufficient. The enemies within Maze Island Palace tell their own story. Blue Iron Knuckles, stronger and faster than their red counterparts, suggest that whatever threat Hyrule faced was adapting. The defenders had to constantly innovate, creating more powerful guardians for each palace. Skull heads floating through corridors, seemingly immune to conventional attacks, hint at the supernatural nature of Hyrule's enemy. This wasn't an invasion by moblins or conventional forces. This was an assault by dark magic itself. The spells Link learns throughout his journey — shield, jump, life, fairy, fire, reflect, spell, thunder — aren't just gameplay mechanics. They're the accumulated magical knowledge of Hyrule's greatest wizards, preserved in towns and hidden locations, specifically so that a future hero could access them. Each spell represents a magical breakthrough achieved during the crisis, techniques developed out of necessity when conventional weapons proved inadequate. Consider the downward thrust and upward thrust techniques taught by knight statues in various towns. These aren't standard sword techniques, they're specialized combat forms developed to counter specific enemy types. The ancients learned through bitter experience that Iron Knuckles are vulnerable to downward attacks, that certain flying enemies require upward strikes. These techniques are lessons written in blood, preserved so that future defenders wouldn't have to relearn them through countless deaths. The Three-Eye Rock Palace, hidden in a swamp and accessible only through specific knowledge, represents another desperate measure. Swamps are naturally difficult to navigate, offering protection through terrain itself. But the ancient builders went further, concealing the palace entrance behind landmarks that only those with specific knowledge could interpret. This suggests that by this point in the crisis, Hyrule's defenders had to consider the possibility of betrayal. They couldn't trust that everyone would fight for the kingdom, so they hid the palaces in ways that required secret knowledge to access. Inside this palace, the difficulty spikes again. Enemies attack in complex patterns, environmental hazards become more lethal, and the path forward becomes increasingly non-obvious. But look at what this reveals about the historical timeline. Each palace shows more desperation than the last. They weren't built simultaneously as part of a grand defensive plan. They were constructed sequentially, each one a response to the failure of previous defenses. The ancient kingdom was losing, and they knew it. The Great Palace represents the final, most desperate measure imaginable. Located in the eastern reaches of Hyrule, accessible only after obtaining all previous treasures and defeating all previous guardians, this massive structure is less a palace and more a fortress city. Its sheer size dwarfs all previous palaces. Its complexity makes earlier dungeons look like practice runs. And its defenders, the absolute most powerful enemies in the entire game, tell us exactly what this palace was designed to protect. The Triforce of Courage, the final piece needed to complete the sacred relic and awaken the sleeping princess, rests within the Great Palace. But why this piece specifically? The triforce of power and wisdom already existed in the world. Ganon possessed power in the original game, and Zelda held wisdom. Courage was hidden, deliberately removed from circulation and locked away in the most secure location the ancient kingdom could create. This suggests something profound about Hyrule's ancient crisis. The threat they faced specifically targeted the Triforce of Courage. Perhaps the enemy sought to break the will of Hyrule's defenders, to eliminate the very concept of heroic resistance. By hiding courage itself, the ancient kingdom ensured that even if they fell, even if their civilization crumbled, the potential for future heroes would survive. The Great Palace isn't just a dungeon, it's a time capsule of hope. The enemies guarding the Great Palace reveal the catastrophic nature of what Hyrule survived. Blue Iron Knuckles patrol in groups, no longer isolated challenges, but coordinated threats. Flying enemies swarm in patterns that require perfect technique to overcome. The palace itself seems alive with malice, every corridor a death trap, every room a potential dead end. This architecture screams of a kingdom making its final stand, throwing every defensive measure they possessed into one last desperate fortification.
And then there's Thunderbird, the palace's guardian boss. This isn't a corrupted guardian or twisted defender, it's a primordial force of destruction, a creature of pure magical energy. Its very presence in the palace suggests that the ancient threat Hyrule faced wasn't entirely mortal. The kingdom battled forces beyond conventional warfare, enemies that could only be sealed away, never truly defeated. Finally, at the Great Palace's heart, Link faces Dark Link, his own shadow. This encounter has spawned countless theories, but examined through the lens of the palace's historical purpose, it takes on new meaning. The final guardian isn't an external threat, it's a test of the hero's own courage. The ancient builders understood that acquiring the Triforce of Courage required more than strength or magical power. It demanded absolute self-mastery. Only someone who could defeat their own darkness deserved to wield courage itself. When Link finally claims the Triforce of Courage and the complete Triforce awakens the sleeping princess, the full scope of the historical narrative becomes clear. This ancient Zelda refused to reveal the Triforce's location even under threat of eternal sleep. Her curse wasn't punishment, it was her choice. She chose to become a living seal, ensuring that the Triforce of Courage remained hidden until a worthy hero emerged. The wizard who cursed her, the king's advisor who sought the Triforce's power, represents the internal corruption that often precedes external collapse. Hyrule didn't just face invasion, it faced betrayal from within. The wizard's treachery forced the king to scatter the Triforce, to create the elaborate palace system, to effectively destroy his own kingdom's cohesion in order to save its soul. This recontextualizes the entire original Legend of Zelda. When Ganon invades in that game, he's not attacking a thriving kingdom, he's attacking the ruins of a civilization still recovering from an ancient catastrophe. Hyrule was already broken, already scattered, already operating from a position of weakness. Zelda 1's 8 dungeons, Ganon's conquest, Link's heroic journey, all of it takes place in a kingdom still haunted by its darkest hour. The sleeping Princess Zelda in the North Castle isn't just a damsel to rescue, she's a living monument to Hyrule's ancient sacrifice. Her awakening represents the kingdom finally reclaiming its lost courage, finally healing from wounds inflicted generations before Link was even born. The curse's breaking doesn't just save one princess, it symbolically completes Hyrule's recovery from existential threat. Notice how the towns in Zelda II have names that would become the sages in Ocarina of Time. Rauru, Ruto, Saria, Mido, Naboru, Darunia. This isn't coincidence, it's Nintendo establishing deep lore connections. These towns represent the survivors of the ancient catastrophe, communities founded by or named after the very individuals who would become legendary in their own right. The seeds of Hyrule's future greatness were planted in its darkest hour. The magic containers, heart containers, and experience system in Zelda 2 aren't just RPG mechanics, they represent Link growing stronger by retracing the paths of ancient heroes. Every level gained, every stat increased, every new spell learned brings him closer to the power level required to survive what the ancient kingdom barely endured. The game's notorious difficulty is actually canonical. Hyrule's ancient crisis was so severe that only the strongest possible hero could hope to resolve its lingering consequences. The palace's placement across Hyrule reveals strategic thinking that makes sense only in context of desperate defensive warfare. Death Mountain palaces control the northern approaches, island palaces defend against sea-based threats, swamp palaces guard the wetlands, eastern palaces protect the kingdom's heartland. This isn't random distribution, it's a defensive perimeter established by military strategists who knew exactly where threats would emerge. The hammer, raft, flute, boots, cross, and magical key aren't just tools for exploration, they're keys to understanding how the ancient kingdom functioned. The hammer breaks barriers, suggesting Hyrule once maintained strict territorial boundaries. The raft crosses water, implying maritime trade and travel networks. The flute summons help, revealing communication systems that spanned great distances. Each item represents infrastructure that existed before the catastrophe destroyed the kingdom's cohesion. Enemy types throughout the game tell their own historical story. Moblins, Octoroks, and Levers appear in Zelda I and Zelda II, suggesting these creatures survived the ancient catastrophe and remained threats throughout Hyrule's history. But Zelda II introduces new enemies, Akes, Bots, Foka, Moa, creatures that might represent mutations or corruptions born from the magical chaos of the ancient war. The world itself bears scars from what Hyrule endured. The distinction between Zelda II's overworld and palace interiors becomes symbolically important. The overworld uses a top-down perspective, similar to the first game, representing the known world, the surface reality that players and NPCs understand. But entering a palace shifts to side-scrolling perspective, literally changing the viewing angle.
This could represent descending into historical layers, exploring depths of the past that surface dwellers can no longer access. The palaces exist in a different dimension of understanding, accessible only to those brave enough to confront history directly. Boss battles in each palace follow an interesting progression that mirrors Hyrule's defensive evolution. Horsehead in Parapa Palace is straightforward, a mounted knight representing conventional military defense. Helmet Head in Midoro Palace is similar but stronger, showing adaptation. Rebenak in Island Palace combines horse and foot combat, representing tactical flexibility. Karok in Maze Island Palace uses teleportation and magic, showing supernatural countermeasures. Guma in Ocean Palace is a massive brute, representing desperate deployment of overwhelming force. Barba in Three Eye Rock Palace is a dragon, suggesting the ancient kingdom resorted to mythological weapons. Each boss represents an escalation in defensive measures. The Link Doll item, obtained from a hidden location, allows Link to create a dummy that enemies attack instead of him. This seemingly minor item actually reveals sophisticated magical deception tactics developed during the ancient crisis. Hyrule's defenders learned to create illusions, to misdirect enemies, to fight smart rather than strong. These weren't just warriors, they were tactical innovators forced to develop unconventional solutions to survive overwhelming odds. The existence of Error and Bagu, NPCs who provide crucial help through unconventional means, suggests that even during or after the catastrophe, Hyrule maintained hidden networks of helpers and secret knowledge keepers. These aren't random townspeople, they're descendants or successors to individuals who preserved critical information through the kingdom's darkest times. Their casual demeanor masks their crucial role in maintaining continuity with the ancient past. The Great Palace's music alone tells a story. It's not just challenging gameplay music, it's ominous, foreboding, heavy with the weight of history. Composers rarely get credit for narrative contribution, but Zelda II's soundtrack perfectly captures the atmosphere of exploring ancient ruins filled with desperate last stands. Each palace theme becomes progressively darker, matching the escalating historical desperation revealed through architecture and enemy placement.
When Link finally completes his quest and awakens the ancient princess, the triforce appears complete and glowing. But think about what this means historically. For the first time in possibly centuries, the triforce is whole again. The ancient king scattered it to prevent misuse. Ganon sought it in the first game. Only now, through Link's heroic journey through the palaces, does Hyrule finally possess its sacred relic intact. This completion represents more than one hero's achievement. It symbolizes Hyrule's civilization reaching a point of recovery, where they can once again be trusted with ultimate power. The kingdom has matured, learned from past mistakes, survived its trials. The Sleeping Princess awakening isn't just a happy ending, it's Hyrule reclaiming its heritage, stepping out of the shadow of ancient catastrophe and into a new era. The game's infamous difficulty serves the narrative in ways rarely acknowledged. Players experience firsthand the brutal challenges that Hyrule's ancient defenders faced. Every death to an Iron Knuckle, every fall into lava, every failure in the Great Palace makes players feel the desperate odds the ancient kingdom overcame. Zelda II doesn't just tell a story of ancient struggle, it makes players live it. This recontextualization transforms Zelda II from that weird hard Zelda game into one of the franchise's most ambitious narrative experiments. Nintendo didn't just create a challenging sequel, they crafted an archaeological mystery where the dungeons themselves are primary sources, where enemy placement is historical documentation, where every gameplay element contributes to world building. The palaces aren't just levels to complete, they're monuments to Hyrule's greatest crisis and most heroic sacrifice. Each one stands as testimony to a civilization that refused to surrender, that hid its most precious treasures, not in grand displays of wealth, but in fortified tombs designed to outlast any catastrophe. The ancient Hylians knew they might fall, but they ensured their legacy would survive for a worthy hero to discover. Link's journey through these palaces isn't just adventure, it's inheritance. He receives the accumulated knowledge, power, and wisdom of an entire civilization's final desperate defense. The spells, items, and techniques aren't just power-ups, they're ancestral gifts, tools crafted in necessity and preserved in hope. Every palace cleared represents another chapter of Hyrule's hidden history reclaimed from oblivion. The Sleeping Princess represents Hyrule's lost courage, literally sealed away until the kingdom was ready to reclaim it. Her curse wasn't tragedy, it was insurance. By choosing eternal sleep over revealing the Triforce's location, she ensured that courage would remain protected through the kingdom's darkest hours. Her awakening signals that those dark hours have finally ended. So the next time someone dismisses Zelda II as just a difficult black sheep, remember the intricate historical narrative woven into every palace, every enemy, every item. This game tells the story of Hyrule's apocalypse and recovery through environmental storytelling decades before that term became industry standard. It rewards careful observation and thoughtful analysis in ways that pure combat challenge never could. The true history of Zelda II's palaces isn't found in instruction manuals or explicit dialogue. It's written in architecture, preserved in enemy formations, encoded in item placement. It's a story that demands players look beyond surface difficulty to see the narrative brilliance underneath. And for those willing to explore these ancient ruins with eyes open to their historical significance, Zelda II reveals itself as one of the most sophisticated storytelling achievements in classic gaming. The adventure of Link indeed, but also the adventure of ancient Hyrule, preserved in stone and shadow, waiting for heroes brave enough to uncover its secrets.